the knife blade glimmered with a sound of tearing, and the fish, slit from throat to vent, with a nick on either side of the neck, dropped at Long Jack's feet. "Hi!" said Long Jack, with a scoop of his mittened hand. The cod's liver dropped in the basket. Another wrench and scoop sent the head and offal flying, and the empty fish slid across to Uncle Salters, who snorted fiercely. There was another sound of tearing, the backbone flew over the bulwarks, and the fish, headless, gutted and open, splashed in the tub, sending the salt water into Harvey's astonished mouth. After the first yell, the men were silent. The cod moved along as though they were alive, and long ere Harvey had ceased wondering at the miraculous dexterity of it all, his tub was full. "Pitch," grunted Uncle Salters, without turning his head, and Harvey pitched the fish by twos and threes down the hatch. "Hi! Pitch 'em bunchy!" shouted Dan. "Don't scatter. Uncle Salters is the best splitter in the fleet. Watch him mind his book." Indeed, it looked a little as though the round uncle were cutting magazine pages against time. Manuel's body, cramped over it from the hips, stayed like a statue, but his long arms grabbed the fish without ceasing. Little Penn toiled valiantly, but it was easy to see he was weak. Once or twice Manuel found time to help him without breaking the chain of supplies, and once Manuel howled because he had caught his finger in a Frenchman's hook. These hooks are made of soft metal, to be rebent after use, but the cod very often get away with them and are hooked again elsewhere, and that is one of the many reasons why the Gloucester boats despise the Frenchmen. Down below, the rasping sound of rough salt rubbed on rough flesh sounded like the whirring of a grindstone, a steady undertune to the click-nick of the knives in the pen, the wrench and schloop of torn heads, dropped liver, and flying offal, the "Caraah" of Uncle Salters's knife scooping away backbones, and the flap of wet, opened bodies falling into the tub. At the end of an hour Harvey would have given the world to rest, for fresh, wet cod weigh more than you would think, and his back ached with the steady pitching. But he felt for the first time in his life that he was one of a working gang of men, took pride in the thought, and held on sullenly. "Knife-o!" shouted Uncle Salters at last. Penn doubled up, gasping among the fish. Manuel bowed back and forth to supple himself, and Long Jack leaned over the bulwarks. The cook appeared, noiseless as a black shadow, collected a mass of backbones and heads, and retreated. "Blood ends for breakfast and head chowder," said Long Jack, smacking his lips. "Knife-ho!" repeated Uncle Salters, waving the flat, curved splitter's weapon. "Look by your foot, Harve!" cried Dan below. Harvey saw half a dozen knives stuck in a cleat in the hatch combing. He dealt these around, taking over the dulled ones. "Water," said Disko Troop. "Scuttlebut's forward, and the dipper's alongside. Hurry, Harve," said Dan. He was back in a minute with a big dipper full of stale brown water which tasted like nectar, and loosed the jaws of Disko and Tom Platt. "These are cod," said Disko. "They ain't Damascus figs, Tom Platt, nor yet silver bars. I've told you that every single time since we've sailed together." "A matter o' 7 seasons," returned Tom Platt coolly. "Good stowin's good stowin' all the same, and there's a right and a wrong way o' stowin' ballast even. If you'd ever seen 400 ton o' iron set into the Hi!" With a yell from Manuel, the work began again, and never stopped till the pen was empty. The instant the last fish was down, Disko Troop rolled aft to the cabin with his brother. Manuel and Long Jack went forward. Tom Platt only waited long enough to slide home the hatch ere he too disappeared. In half a minute Harvey heard deep snores in the cabin, and he was staring blankly at Dan and Penn. "I did a little better that time, Danny," said Penn, whose eyelids were heavy with sleep. "But I think it is my duty to help clean." "Wouldn't hev your conscience for 1,000 quintal," said Dan. "Turn in, Penn. You've no call to do boy's work. Draw a bucket, Harvey. Oh, Penn, dump these in the gurry butt 'fore you sleep. Can you keep awake that long?" Penn took up the heavy basket of fish livers, emptied them into a cask with a hinged top, lashed by the foc'sle. Then he too dropped out of sight in the cabin. "Boys clean up after dressin' down, an' first watch in calm weather is boys' watch on the We're Here." Dan sluiced the pen energetically, unshipped the table, set it up to dry in the moonlight, ran the red knife blades through a wad of oakum, and began to sharpen them on a tiny grindstone, as Harvey threw offal and backbones overboard under his direction. At the first splash a silvery white ghost rose bolt upright from the oily water and sighed a weir, whistling sigh. Harvey started back with a shout, but Dan only laughed. "Grampus," said he, "beggin' fer fish heads. They up end that way when they're hungry. Breath on him like the doleful tombs, hain't he?" A horrible stench of decayed fish filled the air as the pillar of white sank, and the water bubbled oilily. "Hain't you never seen a grampus up end before? You'll see 'em by hundreds 'fore you're through. Say, it's good to have a boy aboard again. Otto was too old, an' a Dutchy at that. Him an' me we fought considerable. Wouldn't ha' keered fer that if he'd had a Christian tongue in his head. Sleepy?" "Dead sleepy," said Harvey, nodding forward. "Mustn't sleep on watch. Rouse up an' see if our anchor light's bright an' shinin'. You're on watch now, Harve." "Pshaw! What's to hurt us? Bright as day." "Just when things happen, Dad says. Fine weather's good sleepin', an' 'fore you know, maybe, you're cut in two by a liner, an' 17 brass-bound officers, all gentlemen, lift their hand to it that your lights was out an' there was a thick fog. Harve, I've kinder took to you, but if you nod once more I'll lay into you with a rope's end." The moon, who sees many strange things on the Banks, looked down on a slim youth in knickerbockers and a red jersey staggering around the cluttered decks of a 70-ton schooner, while behind him, waving a knotted rope, walked, after the manner of an executioner, a boy who yawned and nodded between the blows he dealt. The lashed wheel groaned and kicked softly, the riding sail slatted a little in the shifts of the light wind, the windlass creaked, and the miserable procession continued. Harvey expostulated, threatened, whimpered, and at last wept outright, while Dan, the words clotting on his tongue, spoke of the beauty of watchfulness, and slashed away with the rope's end, punishing the dories as often as he hit Harvey. At last the clock in the cabin struck 10, and upon the 10th stroke little Penn crept on deck. He found two boys in two tumbled heaps side by side on the main hatch, so deeply asleep that he actually rolled them to their berths. End of chapter.